Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for all being here to discuss the Child Mind Institute's 2023 Children's Mental Health Report and the important topics of literacy, reading instruction, and educational equity addressed within. I'm Dr. Matthew Cruger, the Clinical Director of the Child Mind Institute, the leading independent nonprofit in children's mental health. We're dedicated to transforming the lives of children and families struggling with mental health and learning disorders by giving them the help they need to thrive. As many of you are likely aware, there's a youth mental health crisis across our country. There is also, as this report shows, a reading crisis. These two issues are connected in important ways, which we will discuss today. Since we treat both mental health and learning disorders at the Child Mind Institute, I've seen time and again how learning challenges can lead to mental health challenges and vice versa. This topic is doubly important to the Child Mind Institute and to our nation. I'm so pleased we have three leading experts here today to discuss literacy and reading instruction and the impact on both the mental health of our children, and ultimately to try to figure out their ability to thrive in a variety of ways. I'd like to start by introducing Nanci Bell. Nanci, would you like to introduce yourself to everyone and talk about your work at Lindamood-Bell?
Thank you, Matt. I certainly would. Lindamood-Bell Learning Processes provides services to students in schools and students in our learning centers. We identify their strengths and their weaknesses in learning, especially reading. Our goal is to provide explicit instruction that's individualized to help them resolve their reading challenges. We see two separate weaknesses. A child may have a weakness in decoding only or a weakness in comprehension only. So sometimes some of our students have weaknesses in both. Students with decoding weakness are sometimes, but not always, Matt, pre-diagnosed with dyslexia. Students with comprehension weakness, despite accurate fluent decoding, often experience words going in one ear and out the other, and they're generally not diagnosed. They have difficulty understanding what they hear and what they read, and often are thought of as not paying attention or not trying. Both of these conditions, we believe, are causal and mental health issues.
Thank you, Nanci. Dr. Phillips, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your work in the Learning and Development Center at the Child Mind Institute?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. I'm Dr. Laura Phillips. I'm a clinical neuropsychologist and the Senior Director of the Learning and Development Center at the Child Mind Institute, where we provide comprehensive neuropsychological evaluations for children and adolescents who are struggling with learning disorders and other neurodevelopmental conditions, along with the social and emotional struggles that can often occur alongside them. Within our center, we also have a team of clinicians here that provide evidence-based remedial support for children who have these conditions. Within the broader organization, we have a team of clinicians who provide evidence-based support for the mental health challenges that can accompany or sometimes stem from these conditions. This topic is so important to me personally because we know so much about how the brain reads, how children should be taught how to read, how to identify these reading struggles, and how to remediate these reading struggles. And yet so many children in this country still go without proper reading instruction and support. And that's just contributing further to this reading crisis, to academic underachievement, to underemployment, and to both physical and mental health struggles.
Thank you, Laura. Dr. Louie, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your work with children and adolescents who have anxiety disorders?
Hi, sure. I'm Dr. Jenny Louie. I'm a senior clinical psychologist in the Anxiety Disorder Center at the Child Mind Institute in California. I work with children, adolescents, and their families to address anxiety and mood-related issues. I'm so glad to be here today, as we know poor reading skills have the potential to make life harder and more painful for kids. So it's critical to share this research and strategies to support early intervention.
Thank you so much, Jenny. I'm really glad to be a part of this panel, and I want to move the conversation to talk about why reading instruction matters. We all know that reading is a crucial skill for getting by in school and in life. But right now, huge numbers of children in the United States are struggling to read fluently. According to the most recent data, only about 34% of fourth grade students in the US are proficient readers. Let's start by talking a little bit more about those numbers and why they're so alarming and what it is we need to do to essentially get children to have quality reading instruction. Nanci, could we start with you? Can you comment about that?
Sure. I've made a number of presentations on this, and I have a little bit more information I think is a concern, along with what you've already said, Matt. 15% of the school population in America, that's more than 7.2 million students, have a condition qualifying them for special ed. 85% of those students have a primary learning disability in reading and or processing language. The most common type of learning disability, which I know we're going to talk about later, is dyslexia. So I guess my stamp on that is learning to read and comprehend what we read serves as a foundation for all educational pursuits and indeed, truly, for success in life. Yet millions don't have it. I think that the panel today is going to talk more about what we can do about it, Matt.
Laura, would you add anything to that?
Sure. I mean, I would say that these numbers are alarming for a few reasons. First, because they really aren't changing. This isn't a new phenomenon. This isn't related to COVID-related school closures or the shift to remote learning that took place in the recent years, although that certainly didn't help the situation. But this number has been pretty consistent since the early 90s, if not before that. And that's even despite the mounting evidence that we have about how children learn how to read and how they should be instructed to read. That needle still hasn't moved much. These numbers are also really alarming because of the profound implications that they have, both in the immediate and the long term. And we'll get into that, I think, throughout this conversation. But we know that there's significant impact on academic achievement, early school dropout, which then leads to underemployment or unemployment and reduced earning potential. And that comes with a whole host of both mental and physical health outcomes as well.
What do we know about how reading ability in the early grades affects academic achievement later on?
Sure. So we know that children who struggle with reading in the early years, let's say kind of those earlier elementary school years like K through 3, are at greater risk for ongoing academic difficulties. So there are studies showing that children who aren't reading proficiently by the end of 3rd grade are 4 times more likely than they're typically reading peers to drop out of school prematurely, that is before graduation. There are some social emotional reasons for this, including academic demoralization, and kids might lose interest and motivation for learning overall. But we also know that over time, difficulty with reading starts to affect other disciplines as well. So in 3rd grade, there's that famous shift from learning how to read to reading to learn, meaning that at that point in a child's education, class instruction is no longer really emphasizing word level reading, the decoding strategies, the decoding skills that Nanci was talking about, but instead shifts to comprehension and then using those reading skills in order to learn in other material in other subjects, like in science and social studies. And math increasingly involves reading too, with the introduction of math word problems. So even those kids who early on could protectively sort of identify as, well, I'm a good math student, they'll begin to have a hard time in math also. So that just compounds the concerns about self-esteem and demoralization.
Yes, I'd like to add also that a lot of the studies show that early learning reading loss turns into subsequent losses in essential cognitive domains as the student goes higher and higher in learning. Certainly from about 4th grade on, the comprehension issue is really significant. They also, statistics say, may be held back in school. More often, maybe not going to graduate. They can have feelings, you've already said some of this, but I'll say it again. They have reduced self-esteem. I wrote some of these down. Confidence leading to feelings of frustration, inadequacy, and embarrassment. And all of those can lead to mental and emotional well-being issues. And the last one I want to say is that we do see some of this now as we have opened an academy, that the students that are struggling with reading that we see in our academy also are exhibiting more conduct issues or behavior issues. And the more extreme the reading disability or challenge, the more extreme the contact issue.
Mm-hmm. And just to add to that point about impact on other cognitive abilities, we see, as a neuropsychologist, I'm often seeing kids repeatedly throughout their academic careers, and we'll sometimes see, or I would say often see, a plateauing or a drop off in their IQ testing, specifically in some of those indices that are more contingent upon or are more culturally sort of informed. Like the verbal reasoning measures. And so it's not that kids are becoming less smart over time, it's that they're missing out on opportunities to learn new words, to develop background information about the world around them, because they aren't reading as much as their peers are. So they're actually losing out on learning opportunities and access to knowledge.
Are these children who are really struggling with the earliest phases of learning to read, are they experiencing some of these mental health impacts? I know you're highlighting how the challenges can accrue over time, but is it happening also for these earlier kids who have dyslexia and those without?
Mm-hmm. I don't know if Dr. Louie wants to answer.
Yeah, are you okay? So definitely there are mental health impacts that all you guys are alluding to of struggling to read, and that's both for kids with dyslexia and those without. So the literature indicates that the risk of diagnosable mental health disorders is higher for children with dyslexia. They're more likely to experience both external symptoms, so like Nanci mentioned, that disruptive conduct issue, and then internal ones like anxiety and sadness. And I see this all the time in the patients that I see. They're also vulnerable to stigma and negative stereotypes associated with learning disorders, and they often struggle with low self-esteem and feeling that they're unintelligent. So a lot of this research is correlational, but there's also some more direct causal research showing that difficulty with reading may directly cause mental health challenges, especially anxiety. And so we see this all the time. If you're struggling in school, you get anxious about going, you don't want to go. That's not a place that's fun and you feel good about yourself. And so you kind of avoid going, and you feel badly about yourself. So.
Mm-hmm.
And are these impacts more concentrated in any demographic groups? Laura, do you want to comment on that, or?
Yes. Oh, go ahead, Nanci. I don't know if you're.
I think that the literature is replete with poor literacy skills are accentuated in lower socioeconomic groups and ESL. And it's not that those students have less ability. We all know, for example, that that's not the factor in our field. What we think is the factor that's causing the learning challenges, reading challenges, is it the sensory system. The brain can only process information through the sensory system, and everyone has the same sensory system. Some of us can access it differently than others. So all of that can be stimulated, as we've been able to prove many times. But I think that the other thing that needs to be brought to our attention is that teacher competency is one of the biggest factors in successful instruction. And there's a higher teacher turnover in high poverty school districts, and that's a fact too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll also add, I think it's pretty well documented that lower reading levels are seen disproportionately among communities of color and also lower income families, as Nanci had said. In addition to the teacher competency piece, there's also more limited access to support resources. So a lot of families in higher income communities, when their children are struggling, they can access supports. Either they're have more time and resources available to navigate the special education system, or which requires proficiency in the language of your child's school. And Nanci mentioned also ESL students, so families who speak another language at home, who have a harder time just navigating the special education system because it's not in their primary or dominant language, are going to have a hard time advocating for their children despite their concern and commitment to doing so. And also they the access to support services outside of school, which can be really quite pricey.
Those are excellent points. I would like to talk some now about how children actually learn to read. It's clear right now that many children are not getting the instruction that they need in order to build essential reading skills. You highlighted that in the examples that you gave. I'd say the good news is that we actually know a lot about the most effective way to teach reading. And we even have a lot of neuroscientific evidence about how those methods can literally change children's brains to support literacy. Nanci, can you give a quick summary of what systematic phonics instruction is and how it works?
Yes. If you can see me, reading is made up of component parts. It's like a Venn diagram. The outer circle is reading comprehension. It's the only reason to read. And the inner circles, the subsets, are as important as the bigger circle because they're going to allow you to be able to decode well enough to comprehend. So one of them is word attack, one of them is word recognition, and one of them is fluency. And systematic phonics instruction starts on one of the very, very important component parts by developing phoneme awareness and phonological awareness so that the student, the child, can be able to sound out a word, attack a word phonetically. We also have to remember that that's the start, and it may or may not be enough to impact word recognition skills, which I believe are also dependent on orthographic processing. We've seen a lot of students, and I was maybe going to talk about this a little bit later, but I'll tell you now, a lot of students that we can develop that word attack skill, and then when they get on the page and they're trying to read fluently, they don't have enough words memorized in order to have fluent, quick word recognition, and that's because they have difficulty with orthographic processing. So I think that the field of reading is coming to the fact that, thank heavens, that we're out of the reading wars. I think that we're about component parts and we're about sensory processing. And I think that because of that, we have a chance to make a big difference because of what we're doing. The science of reading.
And just to clarify, Nanci, you're brilliant, and I think these words roll off your tongue because you've been entrenched in this for years. But for those who, phonological awareness is really awareness of kind of the sound structure of spoken words. And then phonics and decoding has to do with teaching in a very systematic, meaning slow, step-by-step, sort of building from more basic sound structure, units to more complex sounds. The relationship between the letter and the sound that it makes, and that has to really be done again in a way where each lesson there's a sequence to how letters and sound families are introduced. Every lesson builds on what has already been learned. You're moving from, again, more common or more foundational and consistent letter patterns to harder and those less consistent letter sound patterns. That it should be in direct instruction. So you want a teacher, lessons should really be teacher led and everything broken down in a step-by-step manner rather than just there's as Nanci said, the reading wars we're hopefully on our way out of them, but there's historically been this thought that just exposing children to books will, through osmosis, I don't know, they'll develop the capacity to read, and that really isn't true, that they really do need to be very directly and explicitly taught these strategies for how to decode words. And also that when a student is coming across a word that they are struggling to decode, that they're encouraged to look at the letters and to sound it out rather than to make a guess based on either the picture or the context of the story. That they're, again, these really explicit, systematic, sequenced, and well thought out strategies for how to attack words.
Those are both excellent points. You're highlighting that we actually do know there's a method to teach children how to learn to read, and that's the most effective method. Can you say more about what evidence we have that supports that idea, that these methods of instruction are truly effective? Nanci, can you comment on that?
Sure. As I said before, the brain can only process information in the sensory system. And when you think that reading is not just reading words, as we've all said, it is comprehending and being able to think and make meaning from what we're reading. Otherwise, there's no reason to read. So I'd like to say that reading is a cognitive act. It is thinking. Reading is thinking. I know we think, and we're right to think that it's about sounds and letters, because we all do that. And everything that you said is right. But at the end, we have to get it to the point where there's cognition. So when we have done a lot of studies. We did a study on dyslexia with the University of Washington. We've studied, these are neurological and behavioral studies, and Georgetown University, University of Alabama, Birmingham, where we studied autism. And what we were doing is developing or trying to see what happens if you develop 3 sensory cognitive functions in the brain. One is phoneme awareness, or phonological awareness, that we've all talked about. The other one is symbol imagery, for being able to memorize words, for the word recognition piece. And the other one is being able to image concepts. And both of these have resulted in truly amazing neurological and behavioral changes. So yes, there's evidence for sure. We're on the right track. We're done with the whole language approach that you would blank out every 5th word and have a child learn to guess based on context. Thank heavens we're done with that.
Mm-hmm. There's also tremendous neuroimaging data really consolidating the behavioral research that's been there for a long time. What I find so remarkable is that human beings have learned how to read with automaticity, even though the brain wasn't hardwired from birth to do that in the same way that we're hardwired to learn language through mere exposure. But even though this is a skill that has to be explicitly taught or learned, there's neuroimaging research showing that the same regions of the brain and the same networks, sort of these circuits in the brain, are activated regardless of the language, regardless of culture, and regardless even of writing systems. So whether you're reading in a logographic or an alphabetic system, largely the same regions of the brain are engaged, which is really, really fascinating. There's also research showing how that network kind of evolves or changes over time with instruction. So beginning readers are use certain regions of the brain more than more proficient readers who become more automatic and fluent in their reading. And most excitedly, there's a lot of now functional neuroimaging research showing, based on what we know about how typically developing readers read versus how readers or students with dyslexia or struggling readers read, that there's actually a shift or sort of a correction of those pathways in response to the right type of instruction. So when students are given sufficient phonics-based instruction, you can actually normalize those reading pathways so that they're reading using those more efficient circuits.
That's great. Can you talk about how dyslexia fits into this picture? It's really like a common misperception that all kids who struggle with reading have dyslexia, but we know that's not the case. So can you talk a little bit more about other kind of reading challenges, and does the right instruction vary depending on whether a child has dyslexia or has a reading problem without dyslexia?
Do you want to take this one, Laura? I can tell you that I tried to say initially that we see these 2 distinct sensory cognitive issues that cause word reading challenges and comprehension challenges. When we did the study with University of Washington on dyslexia, just as you said, we showed changes in these, we're all dyslexic students, changes in white matter and dosage amount that correlated to positive changes in reading behaviors. There's absolutely, I feel like we have a chance to say to people that even dyslexia does not have to be a lifelong challenge. We're figuring this out. I want the people that are listening to this know that there's hope for that. We are also doing a replication study at Stanford University. And I mentioned this to all of you when we were first talking. The study at Stanford is 3 summers long. We're just finishing the summer. That study is doing the same sensory cognitive processing instruction, only this time virtually. The other one in Washington was in person. And we're just now looking at the data, but it very excitingly is showing that live online instruction has parity with in person, which means that we're on the right track here. Not only does it mean that we can help more students, and it means that the learning loss that we experienced during the pandemic wasn't caused by, actually maybe it wasn't caused by the virtualness of it. It was caused by the type of instruction that was not being done. So I don't know if I've answered your question, Matt, but I think that what we do with dyslexic students, and when we teach them to decode, it's primarily a decoding-based or reading-based problem or challenge. We essentially do the same thing, because many of the students that we see that are not previously labeled dyslexic have the same profile as a dyslexic student.
Sure. So, and I'll piggyback off of that. So, dyslexia refers very specifically to a developmental or neurodevelopmental deficit at the level of word identification, word level reading and decoding, and usually spelling, with impact further down on the accuracy of reading and reading fluency and automaticity, which then affects comprehension, although there are other causes for comprehension weaknesses as well. But dyslexia itself is rooted in weakness in phonological skills, both phonological awareness and phonological retrieval. So just the rapid retrieval of the sounds associated with letters, and then the rapid retrieval of words from that orthographic memory store. Kids can also struggle with reading at the level of comprehension, but that's remediated differently. And Nanci had spoken about that, the kind of the imagery piece of her instructional programs, which are really, really effective. Dyslexia itself exists on a continuum, and it can range from mild to severe. And that line between mild dyslexia versus a low achieving reader is very, very gray. There's a very small minority of children who will learn to read with minimal instruction. If you expose them to a ton of books and the sounds of our language and nursery rhymes, and we're talking like 5% of the population, they'll intuit the phonological code on their own. There is a subset of children, a larger subset of children, who will learn to read with broad instruction. So if you expose them, whether you expose them to more of a whole language approach in a somewhat explicit way, or a phonics-based approach, but with time on task, with sort of intentional instruction, they will learn how to read with automaticity. We're still talking about a pretty small group of kids. The vast majority of children, regardless of whether, we're not talking about students with dyslexia, the vast majority of children do require systematic phonics-based instruction in order to master that code, and to learn to decode with sufficient automaticity and fluency to support comprehension further down. There's then another group of kids, that 15% that Nanci, again, it's a continuum, so mild to severe, but that final group of kids, whatever that number is, really need that type of instruction, systematic, explicit phonics-based instruction, but in just a much higher dose, and delivered in a very individualized way with a lot of repetition at a high frequency. And those are the kids that we typically think of as dyslexic. But the short answer to your question is, in order to, from an equity perspective, we don't know who those in a classroom setting, which are those 35% of kids who might learn to read regardless of instructional approach. So kids need systematic phonics-based instruction in the classroom setting in order to help to close that gap.
That is sort of the direction that I was heading in, and trying to ask you to highlight and talk about, what we need to do to really put this into practice in children's classrooms. I'm also wondering, like, how can parents tell whether the reading curriculum in their children's school aligns with the science of reading? What are some of the signs that they should look for and ask about?
Mm-hmm. So first and foremost, teachers should be providing direct instruction in phonics. And those lessons should be teacher-led with skills broken down step by step and delivered systematically. So again, you want the instruction provided very foundationally in the relationship that exists between letters and the sounds that they make, and that those associations are applied to words both in isolation, so reading words sort of single words, and also applied to connected text. again, children don't learn to read through mere exposure to books. They really do need to be taught explicitly. Within the instructional material, you want to look at the words that kids are being asked to learn in each lesson. So are words being introduced within a lesson that are within the same family, meaning they sound the same? So if you're starting with short A's, CVC, consonant, vowel, consonant words with the short A family, you'd expect to see words like sat, mat, hat, cat, and they're just repeatedly trying to consolidate that spelling pattern before moving on to a different spelling pattern. That's a phonics-based approach. Alternatively, if you're seeing lists of high frequency words that don't have between them a common sound or spelling pattern, that's not a phonics-based program. And you also want to pay attention to the strategies that kids are encouraged to use when they come up to a word that they don't know how to read on their own. So again, are they being encouraged to look at those letters and sound them out, sound the words out letter by letter? Or are they being encouraged to look at the picture and take a guess based on, again, what you see in the picture or the context of the story? So again, that's not a phonics-based approach. The word wall. Sorry, Nancy, I don't know if you can.
No, I was going to add a few things that you said. I agree with everything you're saying.
Just as we're at the middle end of October, so we're coming up on parent-teacher conferences maybe. So just taking a look around the classroom, most, I would say all probably K through 2 classrooms and sometimes 3rd grade classrooms also will have a word wall. So you also want to then look at how are the words grouped on that word wall? Are they grouped by family, like again, all the short A words, or are they grouped alphabetically? The former is phonics based and the latter is not. So those are just some clues that parents can pay attention to.
Matt, I'd just like to take a moment just to add that I agree that one of the things that a parent, I believe, should do is observe in the classroom. Teacher competency for sure is what you want to know and observe. And most schools let that happen, and all the things that Laura said. I think I said it before, but the biggest factor in student achievement is teacher competency. And so even if a school has adopted a methodology that would be phonics-based, like Laura was talking about, it doesn't mean that the teacher was effectively trained in that methodology. So that's why the parent really should go and observe and look at the things on the wall. There are other things that I made a note when I was looking at your questions, and I think that we want to research. If I were a parent, I would want to research how the school is doing comparatively on state mandated tests. Look at those tests and see. That's data that you can look at. Look at special education data and see what percentage of children have language-based disabilities. And that data, again, will help a parent know if they're using evidence-based programs.
Can you say more about how a parent could make sense of that data, Nancy? What would they be looking for when they look at the rates for language-based learning development?
Well, you have to compare. You have to compare and look at this school that you're looking at compared to what the state is asking for. I also want to, and this goes along with, I think, your next question, which was about what parents can do. And that is, Obama in 2015 put a federal law, and I'm sure you might all know it, called ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act. And that law mandates that every school and every district and every state is required to do evidence-based instruction. So I think that there's lots of resources out there for parents to really get involved and see what's happening in the school.
That law is an example of one of the things that parents could use as a tool to advocate for their children to get a change in the curriculum or the type of instructions they're getting.
And that becomes a parent that's very aware, and that gets the school's attention, and all of that's positive. That interaction is positive.
Right.
Yeah, ESSA, there's a website where you can look at the reviews of the curriculum. So if you know what curriculum your school is using, you can look it up on the ESSA website.
Right.
Is there more that you would say, Laura, about what parents can do or educators could do to advocate for a change in curriculum?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, parents should feel empowered to push for change by approaching the school administration. You can start by talking to your child's teacher and principal and then take it up to the school board and administration to see what steps are being taken to improve instruction in the classroom if you're finding that the instruction doesn't align with what we know about the science of reading. Educators also can advocate more for the use of systematic phonics-based instruction. I think that teachers, when I've gone into schools and talked with them about phonics-based instruction, they know they want to be utilizing these curricula. They just don't have a lot of the schools, although I think that's changing. The schools haven't purchased the materials and many schools haven't provided the training. So I think the teachers want also, I think everyone wants to do what they can to help kids learn how to read. But teachers also can go to their school administrations and advocate for a change in the curricula that's used.
If a child is struggling to learn to read, are there other steps that parents and educators can take to get them the appropriate support?
Absolutely. So seeking out special education supports through the school system, I would say would be the first step. Although a lot of school districts aren't also, if their whole class instruction isn't aligned with science of reading, there isn't a mandate in most states at this point for the remedial instruction that's provided through special education to be phonics-based instruction. So it's a good place to start, at least in getting small group instruction or one-on-one instruction. I can only speak to New York. I know in New York, you can get a voucher for SETS, for special education teacher support services. And there are providers outside the schools that do that take SETS vouchers and will provide phonics-based instruction, but that can sometimes be hard to find. Otherwise, seeking out, we're looking at Nanci seeking out support outside the school system if you're not able to get what your child needs within the school system.
And I just want to add one other thing, that yes, of course, I think we've tested over 100,000 students, and with 4 hours of testing, we call it a learning ability evaluation, and we're talking about as strengths and weaknesses, not just looking for a strength or looking for weakness, trying to put the whole diagnostic picture together. Mm-hmm. So for sure that, but I think that parents can also request or should request a psychoeducational assessment at the school, and just to make sure there's nothing going wrong developmentally. And I believe that most schools would be able to do that.
It's a very fair point that an evaluation might help guide the way for some of these struggles. Evaluations often also touch upon social and emotional issues that a kid might experience in the classroom. So Jenny, let's spend a little bit of time talking about that. We know that the difficulty in reading can affect children's self-confidence. Why is that often a problem? And what do you think parents and educators can do to support the self-esteem of kids who are struggling with reading?
Right. So when you struggle in school with reading in particular, it really it's a big deal because that's what you're doing all day at school. And so it really can make you feel like you're not good at something because you're not good at something for like 8 hours of the day. So it can really destroy a kid's self-confidence. And they know it's important. Obviously, everyone's doing it. And kids can see when they're not doing as well as other kids. So what parents and educators can do to help support the self-esteem of kids is to help them understand their learning difficulties. So if your child is diagnosed with dyslexia, you can talk to them about that diagnosis. What does it mean? What does it not mean? Like, it doesn't mean that you're not smart, right? You can still be smart. And how the diagnosis can help them get the support that they need to excel. The second thing you can do is to be sensitive to kids' embarrassment. So try to make a plan with your child's teachers to minimize situations that might embarrass them, like being called on to read aloud unexpectedly. They can still do it, if that's within their ability, but just kind of giving them a heads up. Mm-hmm. The third thing is to try to praise effort not outcome. So try saying things like, I saw how hard you worked to get through that assignment, and I'm so proud of you for sticking with it, rather than praising good grades or high test scores.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit, Jenny, about kids' social relationships? How can reading challenges affect that, and what could these kids do to connect with their peers?
Yeah, so I think that when you're not feeling great about yourself, it's hard to be nice to other people and get along, and so that can really hurt social relationships for these kids. So it is important to help them connect with other kids so that they can boost their mood and self-esteem. It helps kids have fun at school. So many of the kids that I see, the reason they go to school is their friends. They're going to see their friends. So it's really important. And it helps them see that they're not alone and that everyone has strengths and weaknesses. So if you get them into sports or art or music or something that they're good at, then they can see, not everybody is good at everything. And there are some things that, are challenging for me, but I can persevere. So you can help them join like classes or clubs or sports teams. And you can also try to arrange play dates or hangouts to try to facilitate socialization.
Given how much you highlighted that, there's frustration or anxiety or some real self-confidence issues that can come up when a child's struggling to learn to read, can you talk a little bit about, what a parent can do to really help their child themselves when they see this frustration?
Yeah, so you can help them understand the challenge that they have and how it affects them. So for example, telling them the diagnosis if they have one. You can help them practice what they might say to teachers or even peers about how they learn and what they need to succeed. You can talk to kids about the many role models with dyslexia who have excelled in their fields, like Magic Johnson. So knowing that people they admire have overcome similar challenges and develop their own unique strengths can inspire kids to do the same.
And is there anything that you would say about when a parent might know that the levels of frustration really require some professional support or help? That it's
How do
really
we know that?
about, an evaluation.
Yeah, so usually the biggest determinant of whether your child needs help is whether the symptoms are getting in the way of their doing age-appropriate things, right? So is it disrupting the family, causing conflict at home or at school, or are they having trouble getting along with friends? So if a child's unable to do the things they're supposed to do or want to do, then you may need help and to seek out a therapist.
That's so great. Thank you so much. I would add one last comment to that, which is I do think that school districts also are supposed to prepare kids for life, right? They really are supposed to teach them instruction, but they're supposed to really set them up for success in life. And so those emotional aspects of functioning are really also important for the school district to be thinking about and managing. Nanci, Laura, any comments about those last points about the emotional experiences before we go to a Q&A?
Well, as you know, we did a survey that we just recently. Do you want me to speak a little bit about that?
Sure.
Something that's very interesting. When you asked if I would be on the panel, I said that I was honored to be asked. But I wanted to also look at some of our students and see if there's any change when we work with them and test them pre and test them post. And so I'll just quickly tell you that I just got this report yesterday, and its findings are very interesting to me. We sent the survey to 4,000 students that we've worked with over the last 2 years and pre-post. And it was very interesting I'll say one thing about a couple of these about anxiety. Jennifer, the survey question was, did your child exhibit any anxiety about learning? And we're going to do a lot better, Matt, in gathering this information. But we're in it now, and we're excited to be doing it. Before instruction, 87% responded yes. After instruction, 65%. So there's a 25% decrease. And since we are just new doing this, that seems pretty good to us. But what also is really good is that we asked on a Likert scale, if yes, your child exhibits anxiety about learning, rate the level of your child's anxiety pre, and that was, we just did a Likert scale. And that was 7.1, and it was reduced to 4.5. So I think that we have a lot of information that we are going to continue to gather. We've seen thousands and thousands of students who are now going to make some adaptations to this. Now, maybe some better questions and see if we can't get some better information for where the intersection between reading challenges and mental health really are and what happens pre and post.
Thank you so much, Nanci. I think it's really worth highlighting that we do have good science for identifying these struggles, and we have good skills for intervening with them. And when we do our interventions, we do see growth and increased efficacy, both on the academic front and challenge, but also in the well-being of the students that we're working with.
So important. So important. Yeah.
I'm going to go to some of the questions from our audience and ask you to talk about them in our last few minutes here. I have someone in the audience asking what they can do to help their child who's struggling to enjoy reading. The child wants to read and tries to read, but they want to know a little bit more about how, as a parent, they can foster a positive reading experience and to encourage continued engagement in reading.
Want me to take it?
Please.
I think one of the things, obviously not putting pressure on the child to learn to read, but I think that it's important for a child to be read to. There's a book called The Read Aloud Handbook. It's a fabulous old book with lots of stories and books that can be read aloud. But I think that when the parent is reading to the child aloud, you can talk about the pictures that are in the book, but also start talking to them about what are those words make you picture. Here's what I'm picturing, because absolutely, when we comprehend, we create mental representations. Or we should. We would like to think we are all doing it, but we're not all. And maybe social media and TV is interfering with that brain's ability to make those. I don't know for sure, but I think so. But I think that one of the really positive things that a parent could do would be to help a child learn to love, to listen to reading, so that they're going to be motivated to learn when they get the good honest-based program that we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree, and I'm going to piggyback on that also in just emphasizing you want those reading experiences to be enjoyable. I think that for some parents, there might be a really well-intended desire to kind of use reading together as an opportunity to practice reading. But if reading is hard for kids, then doing it is aversive. And I would encourage preserving the caregiver-child relationship and that reading activity for it to be a pleasant and enjoyable one. So reading to your child, talking about the books rather than putting pressure on them to read aloud to you when you know that it's hard for them, and really leaving the instruction and practice for school and remediation.
One of the families is asking, what do we do to help children who've been bullied as a result of their learning difficulties or challenges?
That's a tough one. So yeah, there's actually research showing that kids with reading struggles are more likely to be involved in bullying, either as the victim or as the, I guess, perpetrator. Hurt people, right? So I think one of my favorite books is called Simon's Hook, and it has 5 different strategies in it on how to deal with teasing. And there's some, there's a metaphor about how people who tease are like fishermen, and that the kid being teased is like a fish. So you learn how to not bite, and there's different ways to do that. So that's like ignoring, but there's, you know, simple things like ignoring or staying away from those kids, but also like coming up with ways to agree with the tease without really agreeing with it. So some different strategies. So you can check out that book. I like it a lot.
That's a great suggestion. What do you think that parents can do to bring this information that we've talked about to the districts and have them be listened to? You know, I think parents are concerned that they won't be believed when they say that there's a problem.
Do you,
Obviously, you can do some outside diagnostic testing. You can make sure the child is tested at the school. You can't do the outside diagnostic testing. And I just think it's extremely important to start communicating with those educators. In my experience in teaching really lots and lots and lots of teachers over the years, they all really do want to do a good job, and all the educators do too that I've met that are at the district level. I think that it's important just to be there and talk to them and say, this is what I'm seeing. I'd like to have my child tested and get me some help.
mm-hmm.
I think that's an excellent example, that really trying to communicate, but also knowing that you sometimes need actual data that support what you are observing. I would also just emphasize every child is entitled to free and appropriate public education. So knowing your rights as a parent can help you pursue advocacy in a more vocal way. Some of the people in the want to understand. They understand how this applies to some of the earlier grades, but what should be done for students who are continuing to struggle with reading in middle school years and into high school?
Mm-hmm.
Boy, that's maybe my favorite topic, because I think that we have really, and then I'll let you speak on this too, Laura. I know it's yours also.
Mm-hmm.
We have focused so much attention on the early years of teaching reading, and so many times those children slip right through. The comprehension issue that's now surfacing in 4th and 5th grade just gets worse and worse as they go up, and they start to slide off in terms of the content that they learn and their decoding and comprehension abilities, and then they're dropping out of high school and they're not going on to college without getting good jobs, etc. I just think that we can do better at identifying all of those factors that would have impacted the student later in the years. And then we have a lot of data map that shows it's not too late to teach someone to read. It's not too late. High school and adults, we've taught a lot of adults to read who were pretty severe dyslexics. And I guess I'd like to leave a note that there's hope for those students. It's not just give up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Were you going to add anything to that, Laura?
No, I mean, I would agree that it's never too late. The reading issues that, if we're talking about dyslexia, so specific difficulty with decoding and reading fluency, can, as Nanci said, be missed early on by really bright kids who can compensate by they develop a sight word vocabulary. They can use other strategies. They're not great strategies, but they can use those sort of the context and sort of guessing strategies to make it through text when it's more simple. In later elementary school and then in middle school, as the text just becomes too complex and there are no pictures, those strategies fall off. And so you might at that point start to see those reading issues emerge. You also often will see spelling issues become more prominent, or difficulty with foreign language learning. So in those in middle school and high school, those are some things that kids that might flag a reading issue that wasn't flagged earlier because of some compensatory skills that kids have. But as Nanci said, it's never too late to be identified, and it's never too late to be remediated.
I guess one of the questions also had to do with children who were really taught earlier with a whole language approach. And you're sort of highlighting that you would think, again, the strategies we're talking about should be applied at the time when the child needs them. So we would hope to deliver them earlier on, but if a child's gone to 4th or 5th grade and not really received the proper instructions, let's start with an intervention that will really make a difference for them and help them learn that process. I think the last question is probably one that would be really worth talking about. The person in our audience asked, when it comes to reading, is the teacher factor greater than the parenting factor, or is it 50-50? It's a really like a deep and existential question, but I think one that's really worth commenting about.
Time they get to school.
So I would say, just from the parenting factor, the only way that, and this is the only sort of contributions that I think of from the parenting factor, is that we know that these conditions can be genetic. So if which is not meant to make any parents feel badly that their children are struggling to read, but parents who have difficulties learning to read will often have children who have difficulty learning to read. Outside of that, the instructional approach and teacher skill in delivering that instructional approach is really meaningful. I'll actually caveat that and say that exposure to books, just reading to children from like the minute they are listening to you, quite literally, but like reading to babies helps really to develop the sound, the sensory processing areas of the brain that help to process the sounds of spoken language. We know that actually, as by 10 months of age, infants' brains, which enter the world with the capacity to pick up the phonological structure of any language across the globe, by 10 months of age, they become very finely tuned into the language that's spoken around them. So from a very early age, exposure to language and books is really, really critical. And beyond that, they need the right instruction. But I'll let Nanci pick.
No, I agree. I think that we've talked about this one for sure, that the competency of the teacher and the training of the teacher and the evidence-based methodology that they're using is certainly going to be a factor, and as well as the teacher's personality, that positive personality. And all of those things are big factors. In terms of parenting, I think that everything that you've said is accurate. It is being supportive and loving and reading to the child and using as many words as you can in conversation and talking about the meaning of words. Because what we've not touched on here is that oral vocabulary is one of the biggest predictors of success in reading, whether it's reading comprehension or decoding. And I think that the parent that's using a lot of words and talking about, well, I'm picturing that for that word, or that's what that word acts out, or word, whatever, trying to expand that child's vocabulary is going to be extremely beneficial as a parent.
I would add one other perspective, which I think is just to highlight. I think really both teachers and parents have a responsibility to try to help kids learn to love to learn. So from my point of view, like that idea that parents from an early age could sort of cuddle up with their kids with a book and have books around that are interesting and that parents show enthusiasm about is a really great starting point. And hopefully that your child goes to a classroom where the teacher shows that same sort of enthusiasm and zest for the materials that are in the classroom and that are available for learning. So, focusing on reading is so important, but just generally appreciating the benefits of learning and talking about ideas and exchanging ideas. That's, I think, really a central piece to things. So I think parents play a really important role. And when you're teachers, if there's a teacher who's not very enthusiastic, then make sure you know that and fill in the gaps there, making it more exciting. I'm extremely grateful for this panel. I think you guys shared so much information, and it's been a wonderful experience talking about the science of reading. I do think I would just close again by reiterating these three experts have really highlighted the fact that reading is, it's possible to identify problems in reading. We have the tools to do that. We have very clear understanding of what we should provide students who are struggling with reading to help them master and unlock the reading process so that they can learn to read in a more effective way. And we know we have to support them in their emotional experiences. Thank you so much and have a great night.